Now from Washington, the Inside Scoop. All the news the government does not want you to hear. Now, here's your host on the Inside Scoop, Mark Levine.
Good evening, America. Welcome to the Inside Scoop. Of course, America is built on our Constitution, and according to our Constitution, everyone in America can vote, right? Wrong. Right here in the nation's capital is the only part of the United States of America where citizens have been citizens for hundreds of years, but have been unable to vote. They have no representation in Congress, none in the House, none in the Senate. Frankly, they hardly even elect their own mayor. They do elect their own mayor, but if the Congress of the United States, which D.C. has no vote in, decides to overrule the mayor, they can do it. It really is America's last plantation. So what causes D.C. to be this way? Why is the District of Columbia such an anomaly with none of the rights that the rest of American citizens enjoy? How can it be fixed? And what does this have to do with a recent bill that just passed the House and the Senate to give D.C. representation? To answer these questions is my guest. Her name is Anise Jenkins. She is the president of Stand Up Free D.C. Anise, welcome to the Inside Scoop.
Thank you so much for this opportunity.
Now, you've been doing this battle for a long time.
Well, 10 years.
10 years.
Been involved with it for 10 years.
You got everything. You got the hat, you've got the earrings, I can even
right.
see. I don't know if they can get those on camera, but it says Free DC. And she brought in fact, this political cartoon that's quite strong, DC Madonna, and it shows her breastfeeding with the suckling babies of Virginia and Maryland.
Yes.
What does this mean to you, this picture?
Symbolizes, this is done by Terry Lee Williams, who is actually a Virginia resident. Mm-hmm. We did this in the end of last year during the holiday season, during Christmas holiday season. Mm-hmm. This symbolizes the fact that D.C. is being used. Our resources, our money is going out, being drained out to Maryland and Virginia, because D.C., one of the strict rules that was applied when D.C. got home rule, our limited colonial home rule, is that we cannot tax the 400,000 people who commute across the 14th Street Bridge from Maryland and Virginia and work every day. So our resources, our D.C. Madonna is suckling the commuters that come in every day, while the people who live here are suffering and starving for that money. It
is a very strange situation where you have the center city in one jurisdiction surrounded by suburbs of another jurisdiction. The metropolitan Washington, D.C. area, I think, is some 3 or 4 million people, with 600,000 or so in the heart of D.C. But then you have 80% who are around it who use the central city but don't contribute to it in taxes and so forth.
Absolutely.
Now, where does this come from? Well, it's all the fault, if you will, of this document right here. This, of course, is the Constitution of the United States.
Yes.
And the founders who wrote this Constitution wrote it before the District of Columbia existed.
That's right.
There was a District of Columbia at the time, and when they wrote, and this is Article 1, you can look it up yourself, folks. Article 1, Section 2, the House of Representatives shall be composed of members chosen every second year by the people of the several states.
Yes.
District of Columbia is not a state.
The District of Columbia is not a state. Now, there is another article there.
Yes, there is.
Article 1, Section 8, Paragraph 17.
Let me read that one. You're exactly right. The Constitution also says, Article 1, Section 8, the Congress shall have the power to exercise exclusive legislation in all cases whatsoever over such district not exceeding 10 miles square as may by cession of particular states and the acceptance of Congress become the seat of the government of the United States. So these two sections that Congress basically can separate a separate area by states, set up a place for the national government, control everything that goes on in it, and at least according to Article 1, it seems that they don't have representation. Now, there's a lot to discuss there with the Constitution and history.
Yes.
Let's go back a little bit in history. So this thing was written in 1787,
yes.
Constitution of the United States. At that time, Georgetown was a city in Maryland, and Alexandria was a city in Virginia.
Yes.
And then what happened in 1800?
The land from Maryland and Virginia was ceded to create the seat of government, which is Washington, D.C. This was created, actually, the first capital was New York. The second was...
That's where George Washington was inaugurated.
That's right. He was inaugurated in New York.
On Wall Street, I think.
Oh,
There's a statue there.
Okay, I didn't know that.
Yeah.
Then it moved down to Philadelphia, and there was struggle between the people in the North and the South over where the seat of government would be. Now, there was like a compromise that was created, where there was money owed by the Continental government to New York. And the Southerners said, okay, we will pay that money to the Northerners so that we can bring the capital down to the South so that we can continue slavery. That was the main reason why D.C. was located in the South.
They wanted slavery in the nation's capital?
They wanted that. They knew that if the capital came to the South, which is where they wanted, which is where George Washington wanted it, it's named after him, they would have to probably give up slavery. So they said, let's bring it down to this section where we can make slavery in the capital, where we know it will be legal. If it was up in the North, it would not be legal.
Two interesting points on that. One, of course, Alexandria, Virginia, which became Alexandria, D.C.
Yes.
George Washington had a home there, in
yes,
fact.
He did.
You can visit it today in
yes.
Alexandria. He was down in Mount Vernon. That was his home. And he basically got the capital where he had his home.
That's right.
And the issue of slavery is very interesting. A lot of people today have heard of the words the Mason-Dixon line, but they don't know where it is. The Mason-Dixon line, as you know, but our listeners may not know, is on the border between Maryland and Pennsylvania.
Yes.
So Virginia and Maryland were both slave states.
Yes, they were.
North of Maryland were free states, Pennsylvania and so forth. But this way, the capital was in between the northernmost slave states.
That's right.
And that way be sort of central, but in a slave area. Okay, so Virginia ceded its part, Maryland ceded its part, and then in 1847 something happened.
You're really good.
I know my D.C. history.
You know it, yes you do. 1847, Virginia got its land back. The land went back to Virginia that made up part of D.C. So instead of having this perfect diamond shape, which is the shape of the D.C. stamp, by the way, that land went back to Virginia because they were continually getting nervous about losing slavery in this area. And slavery, as you know, Virginia is the seat of the Confederacy.
It's true. In fact, I've looked at some of those retrocession documents, and there's no question that the people of Alexandria, at that time it was Alexandria City and Alexandria County, became Arlington County, very much wanted to keep slavery.
Yes.
And the other thing they complained about was not having representation in Congress.
That's right.
And they wanted to get it back. So what exists in D.C. today is that cession from Maryland. That's still there. Okay, so all this time, District of Columbia was supposed to be the seat of government. People were going to come here temporarily and then go home to their home states. I guess the founders didn't see it as becoming a city.
They did not foresee that at all. Now D.C. is the Capitol Service area, which is the White House, the Monument, the Smithsonian Museums. But outside of that, we have Anacostia, we have the Southwest Waterfront, we have the Shore neighborhood where I live, we have LaDroit Park. We have a community.
Sure.
We have a real place where people live, go to work every day, pay their taxes, send their children to school. For some reason, our very bright, forward-looking.
Well, they weren't so bright. They had three-fifths of a person counted as slaves. The Constitution was imperfect when it began.
There you go. There you go. And it's time to move on.
And it's gotten better. I mean, we had the 14th Amendment, which got rid of the three-fifths clause and gave people equality under the law. And it hasn't really been fixed for D.C. Now,
it has not.
What has happened over the course since 1800 to today to try to fix the situation for D.C.? How many times has D.C. tried for statehood?
The actual statehood movement started, I would say, in the early 80s, but there has
1980s.
Yes. There has been a drive for representation over years.
Well, for example, there is an amendment to this Constitution already. Amendment, I got to find it,
23rd.
The 23rd Amendment, which gives the district 3 electoral votes.
Now, isn't that extraordinary that D.C. residents could not vote for president Until Lyndon
until
Johnson.
1961.
That's right.
Actually, it's
it was
Kennedy.
passed in 61, but they couldn't vote for Kennedy, I don't think. It
No,
was
that's right.
Lyndon Johnson.
They couldn't
was
vote for
the
Kennedy. It
fir-
was done under
That's
Kennedy's
right.
administration.
That's
and
right.
they couldn't vote to ratify that amendment either.
That's right.
Because it's got to be
Absolutely.
2/3 of the states. So the states finally decided in
Yes.
1961, Washington's a big city, we're going to let the people vote for president.
That's right.
Okay, but they still can't vote in Congress.
Cannot vote. No represent. There has never been a voting representative in Congress for D.C.
Okay, so let's
D-
go
DC
through the
residents have
history
never
here,
had that.
because when we I think it's important when we discuss where we're going from here
Right.
to know where we've been. So I want to give people the full history. You know it. I want to make sure they know it. Now, the closest D.C. came to voter representation came in 1978. You had a
Yes.
Democratic president, Jimmy Carter, a
Yes.
Democratic Congress. What happened then?
Okay, at that time, we had Reverend Walter Fauntroy, who was our first D.C. Actually, he was not.
I don't think he was the first.
He was not the first. I think he was the second or third. But he, as soon as he hit, started from the city council. He's a well-known reverend throughout D.C. He started with SCLC, the Southern Christian Leadership Conference, Martin Luther King. Now, this is a time when you have all types of, right after, you have all types of turmoil after the 60s, a push for civil rights. I actually have a picture of Walter Fauntroy marching with Martin Luther King in 1965 for D.C. Home Rule. Now, when
Now, let's explain that to people, because people in D.C. know all about what home rule is, but we got people in Virginia, people across the nation who are
Okay.
listening on the internet. What does home rule mean?
The Home Rule tells you that we're a colony.
Well, right.
Home Rule is a colonial status where we can elect, at this time, we can elect our mayor.
Before then, you couldn't even elect your mayor.
Before Lyndon Johnson appointed Walter Washington, we couldn't even elect our own mayor.
So before the 1960s,
Before the
the
1960s,
residents of D.C. had no vote about anything.
nothing. We
They didn't
had,
even go to the polls. You
We
didn't
had-
even need election machines.
we had nothing.
Because there's no right to vote.
That's right.
You don't vote for Congress. You don't vote for president. You don't even vote for your own mayor. You don't
That's
vote
right.
for your own city council.
we had
Heck,
nothing.
you could be living in Canada and
We
you'd
could
have the
be-
same rights.
That's right. We were not full, and still are not
And
full
still aren't.
citizens.
Right. So he was arguing 65 for home rule, which basically says at least give us the right to control our city
That's
like
right.
every other American has.
That's right. However, okay, we got the right to vote for mayor. We got the right to vote for a 13-member city council. However, we still...
When was that?
That was
1970s?
we had our first elected council in 1960...
What was in the 60s?
70.
Oh, it was 70.
No,
1970.
1974. That was the
1974.
first, that
Wow.
was home
That's
rule.
pretty late.
Yeah, our elected government is only 33 years old.
Wow.
We have a...
How old's the flag? I've always been curious about that.
I don't know. Now,
I'd be
you didn't
curious.
ask me something I don't know.
I'm just
don't
curious.
know that.
Because,
Yeah.
when I was a kid, I learned the state flags. I don't remember learning the D.C. flag. I
D-
bet it's pretty new, but I don't know.
D.C. actually is 200 years old. So out of
course.
that 200 years, we've had 33 years of home rule. But still,
Now, that's just the right to rule in D.C., but
That's
it can
right.
be overruled.
it can be overruled. We are still, that's why we're still a colony, or as we say, the last plantation, because anything that our D.C. government passes, any law that's passed, can be overruled by a vote of the Congress.
Article 1,
Anything.
Section 8, Paragraph 13, Congress have the power to exercise exclusive legislation in all cases whatsoever over such district. So basically, even the fact that y'all can rule yourselves to the extent of electing your mayor and your council, that's just by sufferance of the United States Congress.
That's right. And if they want to change it tomorrow, they can change it tomorrow, just like that.
When we come back, I want to talk about times when the United States government has actually overruled the
Okay.
people of the District of Columbia. Y'all have said what you want, and
Yes.
Congress said, sorry,
That's
you
right.
don't get what you want, we're going to rule over you.
That's
and then we're going to get eventually to the bill that the reason why I have Anise Jenkins here today, a very interesting bill to actually give, for the first time in American history, a representative to the District of Columbia in the House of Representatives. Not in the Senate, but in the House, and to give another representative in Utah as well. The toll-free number is 888-488-MARK, 888-488-6275. Give us a call if you want to ask Anise a question. We'll be right back after this.
Mommy's bed. Me and Jenny were jumping on it. Mommy's gun fell on the floor. I was a cowboy. Bang, 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 bang. I said, Jenny, wake up, wake up. It's just pretend. But she wouldn't wake up. If you give me a fish...
If you give someone a fish...
You feed them for a day.
Teach someone to fish.
You feed them for a lifetime.
Give me a fish, and you'll feed me for a day. Teach me to fish, and you'll feed me for a lifetime.
Through Volunteers of America, you can help change lives in your community.
Oh, hey, mister, studied algebra in school and got a better job than I could. You take the last couple.
Oh, no, mister. Stuck in an entry-level job because you only learned basic math. I don't have a boss riding my butt like you do, so you take it so you can get back to your desk.
You know, I probably should, but maybe Miss AP Calculus with the $200 haircut in the big office upstairs would like a cup.
Oh, no, Mr. What was your name again? Never mind, it doesn't matter. I'm too busy doing important things to care. I just came down for some sweet and start.
You know, if my limited math abilities weren't keeping me from getting a better job, I'd quit this afternoon.
I don't blame you. But thank goodness you're stuck here because we really need someone to make the coffee.
Line it up, baby. Come on. Line it up, baby. Come on. Line it up, baby. Come on.
From Washington, back to the Inside Scoop with Mark Levine.
Welcome back to the Inside Scoop, and we're talking about Washington, not in the way you think. Normally we talk about the federal government and federal policies. Now we're actually talking about Washington, the city that is in the District of Columbia, a city that pays taxes like every American city, that sends men and women off to fight in its wars, that in all accounts we think of our capital city as part of the United States. Of course, it's our capital. If anything, it's more American than the rest of the country, right? This is our home. And yet, the people in the District of Columbia can't vote. To discuss this issue, I have Anise Jenkins. She's the president of Stand Up Free DC. Anise, I was reading just the other day that one of our representatives was in China and was trying to tell them, hey, you know, you have a dictatorship. You need to let your people vote. And the Chinese representative turned and said, heck, in the capital of America, people can't vote. Don't lecture us on democracy.
Absolutely. I think, you know, I believe it was Representative Tom Davis of Virginia.
Right. And I want to get into his bill.
It's shameful. It is an international disgrace.
It is.
Out of 115 countries that have a democratic form of government, we are the only capital out of 115 that does not have representation in the House.
And it's ridiculous. It just doesn't make sense logically. Right. And some people will say, well, you know, this book, which I revere, the Constitution of the United States, but this book can change. This book had the 3/5 clause. This book had slavery. This book has been amended. It's been made better. It can be made even better.
That's right.
So let's go through the history, because when we get the history done, I want to talk about the various proposals. 1978, we were just talking about what happened there.
Now that is 1978, Walter Fauntroy, non-voting delegate from D.C., did get a constitutional amendment, a bill for a constitutional amendment approved by 2/3 of the House and the Senate. Extraordinary accomplishment. I think he got it done by one vote, 67 to whatever that 33. Would be, 33.
Yeah, in the Senate.
And this was extraordinary to have representation in the House and the Senate. And I believe it was Senator Edward Kennedy who introduced it. He was one of the strong co-sponsors, and Robert Byrd, surprisingly, one of the very...
Well, it only makes sense. D.C. is not asking for any more than any other American jurisdiction has.
Thank you. Why should I, a resident of Washington, D.C., only because I live there, be considered a third-class citizen? I mean, D.C. residents have less rights than Puerto people in the territories.
Now, tell our listeners what happened, because some people may think that if you get 2/3 of the House and the Senate, it becomes an amendment. That's not true.
No, you have to go through the state legislature.
You need 3/4 of the states, and I think they got a majority of the states, didn't they?
16 approved. It was only 16.
Only 16?
Only 16,
Now, why wouldn't the states want to give another jurisdiction equality with them? I mean, just jealous of sharing power?
You know, Senator Kennedy went through what it's called the 4 2s. That's TOOS. He said at that time D.C. was too black, too Democrat, too progressive, and too urban. And it's always been a struggle. You know what is D.C. going to be?
It's very interesting. You can look at this as sort of a pure constitutional states issue, but whenever you talk about District of Columbia, whenever you talk about equal rights, there's always this subtext of race relations.
Absolutely.
There's always the subtext of civil rights.
Yes.
Why is that? I mean, this is a simple question of whether a jurisdiction should have the same rights as any other jurisdiction. Why does race matter in this discussion?
Race matters because racism is alive and well. We have to admit, and I think this is one of the areas where you can say we can prove that it's still alive and well. During most of its history, D.C. was ruled by, the district committees were ruled by Southerners who always would put a block between D.C. and voting rights,
or
D.C. and
majority
statehood.
black? Do we know historically?
I would say it was not always majority black now. I would say the mid to late 60s on up. Now, we're still majority black at this point. The last census had us at about 60%. At one time during the mid-80s, we were up to about 80% black.
So what Republicans say is because we are a majority black city, whether 80% or 60%, and because some 90% of blacks vote for Democrats,
yes,
they just don't want another Democratic representative and two other Democratic senators because it'll make them harder to take control. So if you exercise your voting rights, you'll vote for people that they don't want you to vote for, and therefore, sorry, you lose your right to vote. That's their argument.
That is their argument. Now, I do have to bring in one thing that is very disappointing to me, is that when we did have a majority Democratic House and Senate for 2 years, we did have one vote in the House, on the House floor.
In 93, 94, when Bill Clinton was president.
And as soon as the Republicans came in with Gingrich, that was the first thing they did,
was
take that
vote
away.
for actual statehood? Because
no, that was one vote in the House. Eleanor Holmes Norton.
Just to add her vote in the House. So it wouldn't be a state where you get a House.
No, she actually had it. She actually had that. It was passed by a House rule, and she actually did have it.
Right. It's actually very confusing. I used to work in the House. She could be, I recall the rule, she could be voting in what's called the Committee on the Whole, which does a lot of House business. But the rule said that if it's ever a vote where her vote makes a difference, they have to re-vote.
Oh,
so even that was not.
It was not a real vote.
It was not. I mean, it was a real vote if it didn't matter. But if you're gonna have a vote when it doesn't matter, how is it a real vote?
It's
so
not.
I'm not. Obviously, it's better than nothing. She could vote on committees and do things like that. But it really wasn't that much. What I want to talk about over the next 30+ minutes, and folks, you can join in. It's easy to do. 888-488-MARK. Call in. You can write on the blog at radioinsidescoop.com. I want to explore all the options for D.C.
All right.
Okay. Talk about statehood. Talk about a constitutional amendment. Talk about the recent bill that gives representation to D.C. and to someone in Utah. Talk about retrocession to Maryland, which some people talk about. Give it back to Maryland.
It's going to be real hard for me to talk about retrocession.
Well, I want to get all the different things out there because I want to know what people are thinking about each of these. Let's start with what you consider to be the best option.
The best option for D.C. undoubtedly is what D.C. This is the only thing that D.C. residents have ever had a vote on, was statehood. In 1980, 60 or so % of D.C. residents voted for statehood.
To become a state.
To become the 51st state. We have never had a referendum on any other form of government for D.C. residents. This means we would have a representative in the House, 2 senators. If our population went up and we required more than one, we were entitled to more than one representative, we would have whatever any other American citizen have. Not only would we have representation in the House and the Senate, we would control our own local budget. Right now, our budget of our own local money that comes out of our own tax money, out of our pockets, can be overturned by the Senate, by the House at any time. They can not only can they hold it up, it has to be approved by them before we can put our money out to our schools.
And now I promised before the break I would let our listeners know there have been times where the D.C. has passed a law or passed a budget, and Congress has said, I don't care what you folks vote for. we're not going to let you decide your own
right.
stuff.
That's
Give
right.
us some examples of
It's
that.
heartbreaking.
Tell us some you remember.
Something that I will never forget is when we worked for 3 years. Now this is because D.C. is progressive, so I'm going to lay it out on the line.
Sure.
We worked for 3 years for a medical marijuana bill. I was part of Initiative 59. We stood out in the rain, the snow, the sun, whatever you got to do to pass a referendum, talking to the people. A lot of people were church people. Oh, I'm not going to sign that. You said, no, this is for people who are sick and dying of AIDS and cancer. The leader of the group had AIDS. He passed away while we were trying to get this thing through. We finally got it approved by 68% of the people in D.C.
More than 2/3.
The first one to ever pass. Every ward, all 8 wards in D.C. voted for this. We went to the Congress. Bob Barr, then Congressman from Georgia, in 3 minutes, put an attachment on to our budget and overturned it. 3 minutes. That was it. 3 years of work was overturned in 3 minutes. Heartbreaking. D.C. has AIDS rate of Haiti, third world countries. We were trying to help people who were sick. And because Bob Barr from Georgia, who we have nothing to do with, never voted for him, don't know where he lives, don't know where his house is, he doesn't know us.
He controls you, even though y'all can't vote for him.
500.
You have some other examples where that's happened.
The fact that we have charter schools in D.C. actually is coming from the United States Congress.
D.C. doesn't want them.
No, we have voted, our council had voted against it. D.C. citizens had voted. There was no cry for charter schools. Mary Landrieu from Louisiana, I think these are both Democrats. And also Tom
Barr
Davis.
is a Republican.
Yeah, Barr was a Republican.
But Mary Landrieu is a Democratic senator.
Pushed and pushed. And see, it's not just what they do, it's what they will make our people, our council people and mayor accept, because they are afraid that Congress will slam them or Congress will hold up our budget. So it's not just what they do sometimes, what they prevent our elected officials from doing.
Fascinating dynamics going on here. And I want to be clear that this isn't about charter schools or medical marijuana.
Right.
Listeners may be on either side of those questions. It's a question of whether a jurisdiction of the United States can make these decisions for itself. You know, you may have medical marijuana in one state and not in another state, or have charter schools in one state or one locality, not another one. The people should decide.
Thank you.
That's what America is all about.
That's what America
so
is.
however you feel about this certain issue, it's fascinating to me because it reminds me actually of us under King George, the American colonies,
That's right.
where we would have local legislatures and they would be scared of what the king might do. And so they would actually vote against their own people
That's right.
in order to, satisfy the tyrant. DC's been having to do that, I guess, all of its history.
For 200 years. 200. We don't know what things we have missed because our elected officials have been afraid of what Congress will do.
Now, you point out that your preference is statehood. That's the preference of the people of D.C.
Yes,
68%.
we voted for it.
I go back to my Constitution, which I read from a lot, which says, new states may be admitted by the Congress into this union, but no new state shall be formed or erected within the jurisdiction of any other state, nor any other state be formed by the junction of 2 or more states without the consent of the legislatures of the state as well as of Congress. Now, Maryland's already ceded D.C.
Yes.
So the only
Virginia.
question, Maryland's ceded the land that became D.C.
I'm sorry, yes.
So the only question is they need the consent of Congress. We'll be right back with your calls right after this.
I, George Walker Bush, do solemnly swear that I will faithfully execute the office of President of the United States and will, to the best of my ability, preserve, protect, and defend the Constitution of the United States. So help me God.
My name is David Bell. I am a resident of Virginia's 11th Congressional District, and I ask Representative Tom Davis to initiate or support investigations into violations of the law by President Bush and his administration.
Tom Davis, my name is Jean Reynolds, and I'm one of your constituents. I want you to join immediately with other members of Congress to begin an investigation of the criminal acts that George Bush has committed.
I'm Nick Spengler of Ashland, Virginia, and I would like our troops to come home and Bush to get out of office.
My name is Nancy Maynard. I live in the 11th Congressional District, and this message is for Tom Davis. I'm asking you to please investigate for impeachment.
My name is Bruce Smith. I live in the 11th Congressional District in Woodbridge, Virginia. I want Congressman Davis to support the investigation of President Bush and Vice President Cheney and those that foisted this war on us.
Hello, Congressman Davis. I'm Carrie Plonson from the 11th Congressional District, and I'd like you to take immediate action to investigate George Bush and his offenses in leading this country into a war that's unwarranted and there is no solution for.
We have to impeach. I am just appalled that we would not, quote, waste our time with impeachment. The message to the world has to be that Bush and Cheney are guilty of international war crimes about which we can't do anything. We can do a lot about the crimes committed within the U.S. Constitution.
From Washington, back to the Inside Scoop with Mark Levine.
Welcome back to the Inside Scoop. We're getting a nice tutorial here in the Constitution of the United States with my guest, Anise Jenkins. She is the president of Stand Up Free D.C., Free the District of Columbia, the last colony in the United States. You know, when you say words like that, a lot of Americans, I think in Virginia and Maryland, they pretty much know the issue. But you go to my home state, which is Tennessee, or further out, you know, Nebraska, I'll just pick a random state, or Oregon, wherever. I bet if you took a poll, maybe you even know this, of Americans, most would think D.C. has a right to vote. Have you ever taken such a poll?
There has been a poll taken. I don't know exactly what the percentages were, but one wonderful thing is 82% thought that we should have the vote once they were told we didn't. But most people...
They probably think you already have it, so it's not an issue.
They do. When people come, one thing that Stand Up does, we talk to people. We go down and talk to the... not only don't the tourists know, a lot of people in D.C. don't even know.
You're kidding.
No, I'm very serious. We do teach-ins, we go around the city and educate people. A lot of people are not aware that they do not have a voting, they think that Eleanor Holmes Norton votes.
I think every tourist site, Washington Monument, White House, Capitol, I don't know if they'll let you do this, I mean, with a Republican president.
Give me an idea.
But to put up a sign saying free D.C., you know, but make it official so people don't think it's just some crazy protest. Yeah, this is from the D.C. government. We plead to the rest of you Americans, we want to be part of America too. We're not. Let us be equal citizens. Let me ask you this though. Constitutional amendment which failed requires 2/3 of the House, 2/3 of the Senate, and requires 3/4 of the states. But a state says, according to the Constitution, I was just reading it before we went to break, all it takes is the state has to agree, but Maryland agreed years ago to give up the territory. So Maryland's already agreed, and Congress has to agree. So all you need is the majority of the House and the Senate, the President's bill.
That's right.
And boom, you have equality.
We have statehood.
That's easier than an amendment.
Absolutely.
That's easier than anything.
That's what we're going for. We want a statehood bill sponsored by whoever wants to sponsor it, present it to Congress, keep presenting it until it passes. I have no doubt that this will pass because the more people know that we are less than any citizen, it's like Fannie Lou Hamer said back in the 60s, is this America? Where you have over almost 600,000 people who have no rights to their federal government, no representation, no nothing.
Some people are going to say, look, if you put D.C. in the ranks of the states in 51, in population, you're 50th. I mean, let's face it, the only state with a smaller population in the District of Columbia is Wyoming.
That is true.
And Wyoming, with 470,000 people, I think, has 2 senators and has one representative.
Yes, they do.
But apart from Wyoming, you would be the smallest jurisdiction in the country, not just in area, but in population. Whereas California, 30, 40 million people, how many they got in California? They got a lot. They only have 2 senators. Right now, D.C. is less than equal. That's unfair. But if you become a state, some would say you're becoming more than equal, and you become like the powerful little states.
Well, you know, as you said, there is one state that would be smaller than us. And D.C. in the 80s had 800,000 people, and we actually were larger than 5 states at that time. But going back to what you like to refer to, the Constitution says that no matter how large you are or how small you are entitled to 2 senators. We would only get the number of representatives in the House that we deserve according to our population. But we just want to have what everybody else has. If Wyoming has 2 senators, D.C. should have 2 senators. We are just asking for what we deserve.
Well, now
That's
some would say,
all.
look, I mean, New York City is a bigger city than Washington, and they only get, 2 senators. They have to share the rest of New York. Los Angeles is bigger than Washington. They only get. So what about this proposal, which I've actually heard some suggest? The idea is that through some sort of deal with Maryland, you get your representative, because after all, every 600,000 people in America gets a representative. Clearly, that's fair. But you share senators with Maryland. You get a vote for a senator, and they become the senator of Maryland and the District of Columbia. That way, you get as much say in government as the people of Baltimore, for example. They get their own representative, and they get to vote for 2 senators.
Now,
what do you think of that idea?
Is that retrocession light? Would you
Kind
recall?
of. There's all kinds of proposals. Well, this is one of the ones I found more interesting, because I think it may be one that you could get Republicans to agree to, because Maryland senators it's a very Democratic state already. They're already going to be Democrats, so it won't change the balance of the Senate and just give you one more seat.
I'm going to say I'm not that desperate for representation. I want what I deserve, and I think D.C. citizens proving by voting for statehood, we are not that desperate. The people in Maryland, how are we going to share the delegate? How are we going to share the governor? How are we going to really have?
You don't have to share the governor. You can just share the senators.
How are we going to do that? But we want it all. We want a state legislature. We want a governor. We want, people say, oh, you don't have voting rights in D.C., but they don't think about the fact that I was talking to somebody, a very young activist, and she said, oh, well, I can't go to so-and-so. I can't go to Senator so-and-so, but I can go to my state delegate. I had never thought about that. If I can't agree with one person, I could have somebody else.
Yeah, people have 3 people to choose from.
That's right. I have never experienced that. I am not that desperate. I am willing to work. We are willing to work until we get what we deserve.
Now, the newest proposal, and the reason I have you on the show here is because some would say that the District of Columbia, with the possible exception of 1978, is coming its closest to having some representation in its history, in 200 years. Tell us about the Utah/D.C. bill of Tom Davis and some others.
All right, Representative Tom Davis of Virginia, since 2003 actually, has had a series of proposals. It started out, I can't remember the bill number, but it started out being D.C. would have a representative actually that would be shared with Maryland. That's how the first four, it's a very convoluted process that he's gone through. That was the first one.
That doesn't make any sense, because while the senator idea makes some sense to me, the representative idea doesn't make sense because you have more people than the minimum number to be representative. So clearly you get one.
Why would we do that?
Yeah, so clearly you get one.
So that
doesn't make any sense.
Yeah, that was the first form. Then it went into another form. Now we're at a point where H.R. 1905, it just passed the House, is going to the Senate, would say that D.C. would get one representative, no matter what our population is. This bill limits D.C. to one representative. No senators. Yes, it does. No senators. Only if Utah, it doesn't say in the bill Utah, but it says the next state that it would have gotten, according to the census, another district.
Which we all know is Utah. Utah just missed out.
There's some debate, because when when it was up on the Hill, Mel Watt from North Carolina said, wait a minute, I think North Carolina was in there too.
Oh, really?
So there's a little debate with that.
Interesting.
Yeah, it is interesting. But anyway, Utah, only if we would get this one person, only if Utah got another congressional district, this person at this point would be voted at large. It wouldn't be a district.
Let me explain why that's important to people, because you have to understand the politics of this. The Republican Party is not willing to let the representatives, the people from D.C. be treated like American citizens and have equality. Their view is we will allow some kind of limited equality if it doesn't hurt our party, because we care more about the Republican Party than we do about the United States. So they said, look, if Utah's next, and there may be a question about North Carolina, but if Utah's next, Utah is a rock red Republican state, one of the reddest Republicans that there is. It's a very white state, as it happens. And D.C. is the opposite of Utah in many stretches. So the idea is a representative from Utah and a representative of D.C. would agree on virtually nothing, and therefore the votes would cancel each other out. And that's why we can deal with a D.C. representative.
And that's why we can't deal with it. That's why Stand Up for Democracy is against this bill. Why would we want to work hard, get people excited? This is something that I thought was very unfair. Get people excited, we had 3,000 people out for DC Emancipation Day marching for this bill. When you're going to have somebody elected who's going to cancel out the vote. They were the last state to approve the Martin Luther King holiday. Not only would they get another representative, they would get an additional electoral vote for 2008. Now tell me that that's not in the pot with what they're figuring out to do. We don't want to be used as a pawn, perhaps. Say we have 2,000 again. What happened in 2000? And they win, and D.C. is Democrat. If the Republicans win by 1 electoral vote, we don't want to be used that way.
Now let me give you the counter argument, because it may surprise you to learn I actually support this bill. Not because I think it's the solution to D.C., and not because it's my favorite choice, but because sometimes I think that the perfect can be the enemy of the good. And I actually think that even though it would do everything you say, and everything you say is accurate, it would be limited until the next census, which is in 2010. It's not that far away. It would really only be for 2 Congresses. It would be for the Congress that begins in 2009 and one that begins in 2011. So only about 4 years does Utah get this extra seat. After the 2010 census, D.C. state remains, and Utah just goes in the mix like all the other states. So I guess, in my view, I'm willing to give for 4 years the Republicans their 1 seat that they demand, because otherwise they're going to filibuster the bill. In order to give D.C. a right that would last for generations. Now, they still don't have the right in the Senate. You're absolutely right about that, and I still want to fix that. But when you haven't had a voice in 200 years, I think something's better than nothing.
You know what? That's the point. We haven't had it for 200 years. So why would I accept becoming a third of a citizen? You're going to cut off 2/3 of what I should have, which is 2 senators. I don't want that. We don't want that. Even if it's not statehood, at least a part of statehood. That would only be part of statehood if we had full representation.
That's why I like my plan to elect Maryland senators. That's sort of my that's my option there. But I'll be the first to admit that has constitutional troubles as well. Because when you're a state, it's very clear who you are. The Constitution knows who you are. Yes. They know what rights you are. We've never really had a partial state, and I admit that has constitutional troubles.
And people have already said they're going to challenge it, take it to court.
Now, one of the interesting things that's going on with this bill, and one of the things that I'm worried about, is that even though I supported it as it passed in the House, I'm a little worried about where it's going in the Senate. In the House, the Utah delegate would be at large. So all the Republicans would vote for that one person, and they'd get a Republican seat. But right now in Utah, there's, I think, 4 seats. 3 are Republicans, and 1 is a Democrat who's amazing by the name of Jim Matheson, who's been there for a number of years. They tried to gerrymander him out of his district. They took like a tiny piece of Salt Lake City where he lives and moved it all to the south, and he still won. He still won. There's 1 Democrat in Utah. If it's not an at-large seat, if Senator Orrin Hatch of Utah, who's supporting this bill in the Senate, gets what he wants, they redistrict him again. Jim Matheson, they could throw him out, lose him, and Utah gets 5 seats, and Eleanor Holmes Norton gets 1. So at the end of the day, instead of having 3 Republicans in Utah and 1 Democrat, Jim Matheson, you end up with 1 Democrat, Eleanor Holmes Norton, and 4 Republicans, actually 5 Republicans in Utah. So it goes from they get 2 more Republicans. It's not even a question of 1 Republican and a Democrat. They get 2 more Republicans, and that's why Orrin Hatch is supporting the bill.
So where is the balance? I mean, this is presented as being, there's no balance.
That's unbalanced. That's why the way I support the bill is only the House version. The Senate version is even worse than the House version, which we both concede doesn't go far enough. Folks, I want to hear from you if you have any ideas on what you think the solution is. Should it be statehood? Should it be a constitutional amendment? Should it be retrocession to Maryland, which we'll talk about a little bit more after the break? Should it be the Tom Davis bill? Is it fair for Republicans to say that because we want partisan advantage, we're going to keep disenfranchised all these people in the United States? Is that fair? Is it fair to say, you know what, I want my way, so you can't vote? And if that is fair, How is that so different from the Jim Crow laws prior to 1960s? If you want to join the discussion, it's easy to do. Feel free to disagree with Anise or me or both of us. Give us your own view. The toll-free number, 888-488-MARK, 888-488-6275. You can also comment on the blog at radioinsidescoop.com. We'll be right back after this.
Fairfax County don't know what public access means.
Some think it's just another channel on the dial.
But it's much more than that.
It's the voice of the people.
People like you.
Your neighbors.
Your friends.
Or your family.
People who want to share ideas.
Opinions.
Cultures.
Lifestyles.
Art.
Sports. Music.
Events.
Entertainment.
History.
Science.
Beliefs.
People who want to learn about television.
Producing.
Directing.
Cameras. Audio.
Lighting.
Editing. Or radio. Talk. Music.
Whatever you think people should hear.
Public access is the place where everyone has a voice.
And it's the place where that voice gets heard.
A place where you can create your own form of personal expression.
So what do you want to say?
Whatever it is.
You can say it here.
Because we're public access.
For the people.
By the people.
It is about balancing our choices between the gray of the concrete jungle and the stunning beauty of the real one, between a stoic facade of granite and the fury of the canyon. It's why there's EarthShare, the simple way to find balance. EarthShare is the workplace giving program bringing the leading environmental groups under one umbrella. Support EarthShare, support them all. EarthShare. Please ask your employer about workplace giving. To learn more, visit our website.
Thousands of kids in this country have everything it takes to go to college, except the money. The United Negro College Fund. A mind is a terrible thing to waste.
From Washington, back to the Inside Scoop with Mark Levine.
Welcome back to the Inside Scoop. We're discussing the last area, the last American territory that does not have a right to vote. It's interesting. My guest, of course, is Anise Jenkins, the president of Stand Up Free DC.
Thank you.
We do have other territories in the United States.
Yes.
There's Puerto Rico, there's Guam. They don't have a right to vote either. How is DC different from them?
DC is different because we pay federal taxes. In fact,
people in Puerto Rico don't pay federal
taxes. They
taxes.
don't pay federal taxes, and their budget does not have to be approved by Congress like ours
Puerto
does.
Rico approves its own budget.
They approve their own budget.
So the people of Puerto Rico are freer than the people of DC.
We're not second-class citizens. We're third-class citizens.
Guam has more rights than
more
you do.
rights than the nation's capital. Yes, it's disgraceful.
It's amazing stuff. Now, some argue that the reason for this. At least I've heard people say that whenever these things come up, well, it's Marion Barry's fault. Marion Barry, the disgrace of D.C., the person who, the bee set me up, Marion Barry, right? I mean, crack, the whole bit. That if D.C. elected responsible people, then they'd get more rule over themselves. And that was the argument when they took rule away in '95.
Yeah, in 1995, the Congress imposed a financial control board over D.C. They took all this, and this was right after Barry was reelected, so it was really the anti-Marion Barry bill. And they controlled everything in D.C. except for parks and recreation. Our local government was limited to controlling parks and recreation. How undemocratic can you get? How many other cities, how many other politicians? We have examples right now.
There's cities all over the country that have elected corrupt and politicians. San Diego, Duke Cunningham, bribery.
Think about it.
And we don't take away San Diego's rights.
It's not right. And another thing,
but do you think some of that vote for Marion Barry was a way of people sort of thumbing their nose and saying, federal government, if you're not going to give us any rights, we're going to vote for this mad guy.
That's right, and I'll tell you, there was a party, I was at the party, and we knew the other shoe was getting ready to drop, so we partied hard that time.
1999.
It was good, that's right. That's right, because we knew it was coming.
To what extent do you think that, let's just face it, we have one African-American senator in the United States Senate. Barack Obama, and he's only been there a couple years. We had Carol Moseley Braun for 6 years. Somehow Illinois seems to be able to elect African Americans.
That's true.
There was one African American, I believe, a Republican in Massachusetts, Senator Brooks.
Edward Brooks.
About 30 years ago. But really, since Reconstruction, I think that's it. I think that's the only three we've had.
Yeah.
D.C. would not only have 2 Democratic senators, it'd have 2 African American senators. Now, here's a country that's 12%, I think, African American or so. So, out of 100 senators, you'd expect 12 African Americans, and we have 1, Barack Obama.
Yes.
How much of the opposition to D.C. statehood do you believe is really at the bottom, people not wanting African American senators?
I think it's still alive and well. As I told you, Senator Kennedy referred to it, and it's still going on. Why does Barack Obama have to be the first candidate now who has protection? You know,
Secret Service protection.
Yeah, Secret Service protection. I hate to say it, but yes. But look what it could do. What could it say about the country?
That's one of the things I really like about D.C. statehood, is that I'd like to see a Senate that reflects America.
And
because we have, you know, it would be an urban state. It would be an urban jurisdiction. It would reflect urban needs and not just represent the people of D.C., but represent people in urban areas across the country.
That's right.
That don't have a vote because their vote is swamped out by you know, the farmland people. I mean, North Dakota gets 2 senators. South Dakota gets 2 senators. They get a ton of money from our government for subsidies.
And D.C. does not. A lot of people think, well, each state chips in to fund D.C. No, D.C. does not get any extra money at all from the Congress. We used to. Before 1995, before the control board came in, the Congress imposed on us, we got a payment in lieu of taxes because we cannot tax people, the 400,000 I was talking about that come in and work every day and go home to Maryland and Virginia. So we got about $400 million. I think it was tied to what was going on in the city. Now we get nothing. We get no federal
It's interesting because I think New York City does tax the people of New Jersey and Connecticut
there's
that
a
come
lot,
into their city. So there's certainly examples in other states. I want to go to your website. Folks, it's easy to find the website. You can go to my website, radioinsidescoop.com, and just click on today's show. Right here, Stand Up for Democracy. You can make a donation if you want. And then you enter it by pushing this button here. There we are. And you get Stand Up for Democracy. Says, Stand Up for Democracy, Free D.C. Statehood, Washington, New Columbia. Would that be the name? New Columbia?
Yes, we voted that it would be called New Columbia.
That was back in 1980.
In 1980, that was part of it. We've got the name.
I don't know. You can't be Washington NC because North Carolina might be upset with you.
That's right.
You might have to find a different way to something different. But what do you think are the prospects for this actually happening? I mean, just because you're right doesn't mean you always win.
Absolutely. We have really, my feeling and the feeling of our organization is not only do we need to reach out to the nation to educate people and let people know that this exists, that their capital is presenting a face to the world that says you're not really practicing democracy. We need to do that nationally. Internationally, the UN has already declared the United States in violation of the residents of D.C. and a violation of our human and civil rights.
Well, it clearly is a human rights violation. It's interesting. I didn't realize the United Nations had passed that.
Yes.
But clearly.
So we need to keep it going.
Now,
we need to educate.
There's one more option that people do talk about. We mentioned in 1847, about 1/3 of D.C., most of what would be Southwest today, went back to Virginia. Some say, well, look, there's an easy solution. We have this historical precedent. All we have to do is give 90% of D.C. back to Maryland. We'll keep D.C. being the capital, the National Mall, and the White House, but the rest of it, Anacostia and Georgetown and everything, goes back to Maryland. You get your representative, you get your senators. What's wrong with that idea?
We are a people, we are a community, we are a culture.
Separate from Maryland.
Separate from Maryland, and Maryland has already said they do not want to be joined back with D.C. The only constitutional way to do that is that the state would consent to.
That's actually what happened in Virginia. Virginia voted along with the residents of what was then the D.C. to go back to Virginia. So Maryland says
Maryland doesn't want us, and we don't want to do it. So that's not going to happen.
And it is a separate
It's a separate culture.
It's a separate culture.
Yes, we are a community.
The people of New Columbia.
That's right.
So what are the prospects? I mean, this Utah bill, your district, your elected delegate, Eleanor Holmes Norton, I have to tell you, she supports this bill.
Until last year, before her primary, she's a constitutional lawyer.
Right.
And she teaches Constitution
right.
at Georgetown University. She opposed this until last year. So I really think she got a lot of pressure.
I have to say, I think she agrees with me that a little something is better than nothing.
And she also supports statehood.
Well, of course she does, and I do too. I want to be clear. I absolutely support statehood.
All right.
The only question is, when do you accept half a loaf? And you know?
I'm sorry, but if I was sitting in the back of the bus and you told me, okay, you can go in the middle of the bus and be happy, I'm not doing it.
Let me read one more part of the Constitution, because I do hear Republicans, and by the way, I'm debating a Republican tomorrow, and one of the subjects we're going to talk about is D.C., because I never let them forget D.C.
All right, thank you.
But she disagrees. She doesn't think D.C. should become a state. And one of the things they always cite is this Article 1, Section 2, the House of Representatives shall be composed of members chosen by the people of the several states. And they say, well, D.C. is not a state, so you can't give it rights. But what they never talk about is Article 3 of the Constitution, which has the courts in it. And it says the judicial power, meaning the federal courts, shall extend to all cases and controversies between citizens of two different states. Now, according to Article 3, you'd be beyond the federal courts, because D.C. is not a state. So if the federal court were to do something, you say, I'm not in a state. You don't control me. Supreme Court, you don't control me. Federal court, I'm not in a state. You can't tell me what to do. For more than 200 years, the courts have held, well, D.C. shall be considered a state for purposes of Article 3. If D.C. is considered a state for purposes of the court system in Article 3, it should be considered a state for purposes of Article 1 in Congress. And by that argument, you should get a representative and 2 senators. So I just wanted to give you, throw out my, I've been looking through this Constitution and finding stuff for you. So what can people do to help you in your cause, either in D.C. or outside D.C.?
Outside D.C., lobby your representative who has a vote in Congress for D.C. statehood. We want to be legitimate. We want to be part of the United States of America. Within D.C., lobby the council. Lobby Eleanor Holmes Norton. Tell her that you want more than what's in that bill. You want to be a full American citizen.
Let me ask you this. I mean, would you actually advocate her voting against this bill?
We did. We've been very active in that.
Why can't we get this bill, but keep up the pressure for statehood? I mean, look, civil rights wasn't won in a day.
No,
I mean,
it wasn't.
Brown versus Board of Education was in 1954. The Montgomery bus boycott was later. The, desegregation of schools was later. I mean, step by step by step. Why not take this step and then get one representative and then keep pushing for Senate?
We don't see it as a step, because if you want statehood, which means you control your courts, you control your full city government, then a step is full voting rights. That's a step. This is a third of a step, and it may even be a step backwards.
Okay. Well, I hear what you're saying, Anise. I have to say, I disagree. I think it's a step forward. It's not enough. But I don't think when you take one step forward, that doesn't prevent you from keep going. And I will keep fighting until we have the state of New Columbia.
All right, thank you.
The capital of the United States of America. Anise Jenkins, where do we go from here? Where does your organization go from here?
Our organization is really going to support various teach-ins, reaching out to the tourists that come to D.C.
Tell those tourists.
Yes.
You need to be, when they have those long lines, you need to have people saying, let us vote.
Let us vote,
because people just don't even know.
They just don't know.
We
want to be in the Cherry Blossom Parade next year.
Well,
so we can march and let everybody know about it.
Can you choose to be in the Cherry Blossom Parade, or does that the mayor get to decide that?
Well, we'll put a little pressure on them, and you will see us marching.
Well, that's good. Anise Jenkins, thank you very much.
Thank you so much.
For coming here on the Inside Scoop.
Thank
You're welcome back anytime. Good luck. May we all live in Washington, New Columbia.
Free D.C. All right.
That's it for